Hello, everybody, and welcome to, well, almost like a first edition or first visual edition of the Loki About Sports podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about what we've just experienced or what we've just witnessed, which was a thrilling Singapore Grand Prix. The 15th edition of the Singapore Grand Prix, and it definitely didn't disappoint. A lot of action. Funnily enough, it started off how all Singapore Grand Prix tend to start, which is pretty boring. Kind of a lot of chess going on effectively. So the first stint was, or we'll take you back, the first stint was basically Carlos Sainz and Leclerc out in front, controlling the pace, just making sure that there wasn't any gap created to the back markers to stop Mercedes really utilising those new medium tyres that they had, and they did a good job of it, to be honest. You heard Ferrari instructing Leclerc to stay, I think it was initially 3 seconds and then 5 seconds behind Sainz. They said that was, or Leclerc later said that was more so for his race, but I don't think so. I think it was really for Sainz's race. They definitely knew that starting Leclerc on those softs was going to put him in some kind of jeopardy, especially with the percentage chance of safety cars and things like that. So it was interesting from Ferrari, and interesting to see how Carlos Sainz has really been outperforming Leclerc in the last two races. Fine margins, especially when you look at qualifying, but normally Leclerc is generally on top of these types of things. So a little bit of a surprise, maybe to me personally, but I think this season as a whole, Sainz has definitely been on top of that car a little bit more, especially with the challenges they've been having. You think back to Barcelona, when the car just wasn't working and Leclerc was terrible in qualifying, Sainz was able to pull something out of it. So I think it's been the general trend of this year. And he's been able to get on top of his teammate for the first time since the first season they were together, which is interesting. And I think it does say a lot for Charles Leclerc's future at Ferrari as well. I think at the beginning of the year, you would have thought he was going to be the clear number one going forward, and really the man to drive the team forward. But Carlos is definitely fighting back, and he is a fighter, so it's not any surprise that is happening. But getting back to the race now, so yeah, pretty straightforward first stint, playing chess out in front. The top five were covered by maybe about a second each. George Russell was falling away from Leclerc a little bit. The Ferraris did have the pace. And one thing that was interesting, which I'll get into probably a little bit more, is after the race, a lot of the pundits were talking about Russell was the quickest man on track. I don't know if you were watching the same race, but I think there were, one car in particular that was certainly faster than George Russell, and obviously that was his teammate, Lewis Hamilton. In the end, potentially it was to the detriment of Mercedes that Russell was actually ahead of Hamilton, because you look at Hamilton's pace when they both came out of the pit stop after that they made under the virtual safety car. The gap was 5 seconds, and Hamilton was really biting away at that. Maybe about half a second. It got to a point where it was about half a second a lap when the gap between Russell and Leclerc got to around 2.5 seconds. Hamilton was about 2.5 seconds behind George as well, so he was definitely quick. But yeah, I think the way it played out was unfortunate for Russell. I guess we might as well go straight into it, because yeah, the first part of the race was pretty straightforward, and where the race really did come alive was when the second virtual safety car came out. So the Mercedes utilising the new medium tyres that they saved up and making that pit stop, which brought the race alive, really. So you had two Mercedes on fresh tyres, and in the end, Ferrari making the correct choice, at least with Sainz. I think they should have picked maybe one of the drivers. I'm not really sure why they didn't. So you could see that it was going to be an interesting finish, because the Mercedes were 1 to 2 seconds a lap quicker than the Ferrari and Lando Norris. It was all obviously going to be a question of when they get there, can they overtake? They dispatched of Leclerc pretty easily, and then they were on to the back of Norris, where it got very interesting. George Russell having really one opportunity to overtake Norris going into the final sector. Excuse me. He wasn't able to make it stick, but what we also saw was Hamilton was all over the back of Russell. Hamilton was really quick. I think, and he rightly so was very disappointed with his qualifying, because to be 4/10 off of Russell in quali and then have such race pace is almost like, well, how does that happen? How are you so far from quali and you're so really what looked significantly quicker especially in the final stints in the race than your teammate? Definitely big disappointment from Lewis because I think there was a lot more to be taken from the race, unfortunately for him. So yeah, obviously Russell had his moment against Norris, didn't work out. And then the Mercedes were squabbling a little bit for the last couple of laps. And then the big moment where Russell clipped the outside or the inside of the wall on the outside and broke his suspension, went straight off into the barrier. Yeah, very surprising. I don't think any of us expected that to happen, especially when these things happen. But it's something that's happened a couple of times this season now. If you take your minds back to Canada, where another unforced error from Russell, where he hit the curb and basically just bounced into the wall. Fortunately, he didn't DNF on that occasion. Well, in the end, he ended up DNFing, but not in the immediate instance. But this time, last lap, 15 points on the board. You've got the podium secure. I know it's not the win that you would have wanted, but to kind of lose concentration like that and throw away all those points, especially with Ferrari leading, and well, there's now a fight on for second place in the constructors between Mercedes and Ferrari. It was very, very clumsy from George Russell, and I'm sure obviously he knows this, but I think it's something he really needs to cut out because you can see there's been a few occasions where he's kind of over pushed. And literally ended up in the barrier. When you compare that to his teammate who drove a flawless race in terms of his actual pace, definitely the fastest man on the circuit. Again, I'm confused as to why the pundits afterwards were saying George is the quickest man on the track. He obviously wasn't, not just because he didn't get the fastest lap, but you could see how Hamilton was really pushing him in that final few laps of the race. And funnily enough, I think if Hamilton was ahead, he probably would have had a better chance of getting Norris and then obviously potentially getting Sainz. But this is all in hindsight. We don't really know what would have actually happened. But just interesting to see the way that dynamic pans out and going forward how it's going to pan out because again, Mercedes not attending the podium. What's all that about, really? Quite surprising, you'd think, for a driver that's brought so much to that organisation. Maybe they think, oh, well, third place is nothing for Lewis Hamilton. He's had 196 podiums. Doesn't mean anything. But I feel like you could really see it in Lewis's demeanour when those things happen because you saw it in Australia. He seemed a little bit down and confused afterwards. And I think you saw it a little bit in yesterday's race. So interesting how that's going to be going forward. Obviously, Lando Norris also getting a podium. Brilliant drive from him. Obviously helped by Carlos Sainz. Sainz, very, very, very smooth operation from Carlos Sainz. Very, very big props for him. It was a brilliant, brilliant drive. Very well calculated. Not many drivers, I think, could pull off a race like that. Very, very smart to keep Norris in his DRS. That's something you see on F1 games and sim racing rather than... I don't remember the last time I've seen a driver intentionally keep somebody in their DRS like that. But I think around a track like Singapore, it's easier to do because you know if you've got about a 7/10 margin, 6/10 margin coming out of turn 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, turn 4 onto the first DRS straight, then you're not going to get past. So he literally just needed to do that, manage the gap, keep Norris in his DRS, keep the Mercs at bay, and yeah, it was a stunning drive from Sainz, very well deserved victory, second victory for him in Formula 1, and I'm sure if Ferrari can get that car sorted, he'll definitely win more races. Potentially this year, because you've seen the Ferrari perform well at two different types of circuits. You've got Monza, and then coming to Singapore, people were thinking maybe they'd fall back a bit, and they slapped it on pole position. So interesting to see how that's going to play out for the rest of the season. Obviously going to Japan this week. I'm not going to make any predictions on Japan as of yet. We'll wait until Friday practice. Obviously the timings are going to be really difficult with, I think, 6 a.m. race start on Sunday. So personally, I've never missed a race. I don't remember the last Formula 1 race I've missed. When I was in school, I'd wake up whenever I need to wake up to watch the race or the practice and the qualifying. But sometimes the Japan ones can be a little bit difficult, but definitely will be tuned in for Sunday's race. I think Japanese Grand Prix are starting to get a little bit boring actually because overtaking is very difficult. You've obviously got the very tricky first sector, the S's. Middle sectors, maybe one overtaking spot, and in the final sector, once you come out of Spoon and you're onto the straight before you go through 130R, the final braking zones, you only have an overtaking point. So qualifying will be all important there. Hamilton will need to get a grip of that, because the last couple of races, Russell's really been outdoing him in quali. So interesting to see how that pans out. But all in all, very, very good Singapore Grand Prix. The first part was very boring, but the way after the virtual safety car, it did come alive. Fortunately, we did get a really good race. Verstappen back in the pack, getting up to P5. Well, it was probably going to happen anyways. He had the pace. You just had the race pace. They probably would have been in a better position if not for when the first safety car did come out. And obviously they were caught out because they were on the hard tyres. You can't really move to the mediums because you're not going to go to the end. I don't think they had another new set either. So they kind of just had to wait it out. And you saw what happened. They really struggled initially with everybody getting past them. Sergio Perez. God, do we even want to talk about Sergio Perez? It's so frustrating sometimes to watch him in races, because you just think this guy is not a bad driver. He is really a good driver. So where's the speed gone? I guess he's having difficulties with the car, but a man that wins 10 races in a row, surely you have to find a way to be up there all the time, week in, week out. People talk about Valtteri Bottas, and most of the time Bottas was up there at least, not qualifying or getting knocked out in Q3 every other race. What is it, 7 out of 15 races is out in Q3 this season? That's appalling. And he didn't have a great race on Sunday either. So where next for Checo? Who knows? Liam Lawson with a brilliant, brilliant performance, getting his first points, or the first points in that car, or of that car, including Danny Rick, Nick De Vries of the season. Interesting what's going to happen in AlphaTauri. I personally think they will keep Yuki and Danny Rick, and I could see Liam Lawson potentially going over to the Williams. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that and what they decide to do with that as well. Because, yeah, Liam Lawson looks like the type of driver that should be in the car next season. It'll be disappointing for him, obviously, if he's not. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how that pans out. Fingers crossed for him that they find a way. Logan Sargent, I don't think is good enough, unfortunately. I think he has tried his hardest, but it's just not come together for him. You can see he's still not managing to put the car anywhere near what Alex Albon can do, or what near Alex Albon's put in the car. So I think they'll probably call it a day for him, and hopefully they can get somebody like Liam Lawson in that Williams. I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him. Any other relevant points in the race? A lot of the race was kind of just dwindling on by. Some good points scored for Pierre Gasly in P6. Kevin Magnussen, after Russell crashing out, getting a point as well after what's been really a terrible season for him. So big props to Kevin Magnussen. Haas obviously very happy, very satisfied with that 1 point. Nico Hülkenberg unfortunately dropping out of the points, finishing in P13. He won't be too happy with that. Esteban Ocon, the DNF, he was in good position as well. He was obviously going to finish ahead of his teammate, and his teammate capitalised, frankly, from it, which I'm sure he's very happy about, obviously, because they, as much as these teammates, they want their teams to do well, especially Gasly and Ocon. I feel like they definitely feel it more when they lose to the other. So interesting to see how that's going to pan out for the rest of the season. And Fernando Alonso finishing dead last. My goodness me. My Aston Martin shares are through the ground right now. Lance Stroll. Oh, are we going to have the conversation about Lance Stroll, really? Man, Lance Stroll smashing up the car at the beginning of qualifying, at the end of Q1, doing some real damage to the car, and obviously himself. As soon as he saw that, I said, that's surely a concussion. The way his head was moving around in the cockpit looked really, really dangerous. I was almost certain he wasn't going to race, even though they'd cleared him. I thought there's surely no way. And then, he didn't race. So a massive, massive disappointing weekend for Aston Martin, especially when you remember some of Fernando Alonso's comments earlier in the season about, well, we wait for Singapore. Well, Singapore came and they scored 0 points. So Aston Martin, I personally have a theory that Aston Martin they started focusing on next season a long time ago. I think they really didn't think that they'd be in a position that they'd be anywhere near the top 4 or even top 5 in the constructors. So they're going to take their money and the extra wind tunnel time that comes with it, and they're going to build a monster for next year. That's what I think. Fernando Alonso is not only satisfied with podiums as much as he says he's happy. He wants to win races. So keep an eye out for Aston Martin. I think next season, I think they'll be very, very... I think it'll be very, very quick next year, actually. Even though they've had quite a difficult middle part of the season. We'll see how they fare in Suzuka. I don't see them faring much differently. They're not Suzuka and Singapore. Suzuka's a track that McLaren will be quick at. A lot of fast corners. Red Bull will be back. Mercedes will probably struggle the most out of those top 4 teams, but I imagine it'll be relatively close except for Red Bull. I'm sure Verstappen will be long gone around that Suzuka circuit. I don't think they'll have the same problems they had. People mentioning whether the regulation changes have had something to do with Red Bull's lack of speed. I don't believe so. I think it was just a bad weekend. And it's happened for some reason. When you look at Mercedes in the dominant years in the mid-2000s, for some reason they'd turn up at Singapore and the car just wouldn't work. So I think it's just something weird about the track that's caught them out. So yeah, nonetheless, I'm definitely looking forward to next week. Suzuka, again, I don't think it's always been the best of races, but we are getting closer to the end of the season. Hopefully, obviously now with my Lewis Hamilton hat on, hopefully Mercedes can put in a good performance. It would be really good to see, and hopefully Hamilton can get under his qualifying, because even in Monza it was a poor qualifying from Hamilton, getting out qualified by Russell by about 3 attempts. I think it was in Monza. So 3 attempts and 4 attempts, 2 races in a row is very disappointing for a man of Lewis Hamilton's quality, and he knows it as well, which is good. When you see him kind of knowing and taking accountability, you know that he's definitely going to come back with something better. So hopefully for the rest of the season, definitely going into next season, especially if they want to be challenging for a World Championship, fingers crossed, he can get underneath that, because he can't be getting out qualified by George Russell like that. Anyways, not in that manner with such a big gap between them. So that will be everything for today. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, ask any questions if you've got them. I'll be uploading clips of this onto TikTok as well. So if you want to take a look at those, feel free. Lowkey_Chibs is my handle for most things, I think. My TikTok, my Instagram, my Twitter page, just to keep up to date with all the ongoings of me and my channel. All right then, well, thank you, take care, and I'll see you guys after this Japanese Grand Prix.